Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Kate Borsato and I am a therapist for mothers, so women in postpartum, pregnancy, and all the way through their journey in motherhood. Welcome. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do and click the bell so that you get notifications every time I post a new video, which is Wednesdays. Every Wednesday I'll be here. All right, so today we're talking about postpartum depression. Who gets it? Who's at risk? This is a question that I get all the time. Moms in my counseling practice online are asking me, what are the risk factors? Like, am I likely to get it? Am I not? What do I do about that? Right? So let's talk about what actually causes postpartum depression so that you can tell if you are at risk. So let's start with the definition of postpartum depression. What is this? Now, this is a condition that women can develop in pregnancy as well. So in pregnancy and that first year after they have a baby. And it's essentially a depressive episode. So it's depression that shows up in this period. So what you would notice is really low mood, feeling really hopeless and down, maybe having long crying spells, feeling like you're totally trapped and stuck, and that there's just no way out, right? Maybe also feeling overwhelmed and anxious. So jittery, on edge, worried. So it's when this severity of those symptoms is so intense that it interrupts your daily life. Like it's hard for you to function. So that would be considered depression. And then when it's in this window of perinatal, period, postpartum and pregnancy, then that's what's considered postpartum depression, okay? Now some women ask me, like, why do I develop this? Like, why do I suffer with postpartum depression and she doesn't, right? Why do some women get it and some women don't? It's such an important question. And what I want you to know first and foremost is there's not one single reason. I know that can be kind of an annoying, disappointing answer. We want to know if I avoid this or if I do all the right things, then I'm not going to get postpartum depression. But it just doesn't work that way. There's a lot of different factors that play a role. And so even though there's not one single factor, we do know through a lot of research that there are common things that show up over and over again, right? Common risk factors that might make it more likely for a woman to develop postpartum depression. So I'm going to talk about 7 of these in this video. Okay, so the risk factor number 1 is a previous experience or history of depression or anxiety, especially in pregnancy. So if this is something that you've struggled with in the past, if you've had episodes of depression before, or if pregnancy felt particularly difficult, then it's more likely that you're going to have a harder time postpartum. Doesn't mean that you always will, but it's a risk factor. The second and related risk factor is having a family history of depression or other mental illness. Okay, so we do know that if your parents struggled or if your mom had postpartum anxiety or depression, it does make it more likely that you will experience this as well. Again, it's not always going to happen that way, but it's just something to think about, something to consider, and it does increase the likelihood that you would struggle as well. The third risk factor that's really important to notice, to think about, is whether there's intimate partner violence or abuse, domestic violence, going on in your relationship. And we know from a lot of research, and of course just lived experiences, right? It makes a lot of sense that if your partner is abusive, or if there's conflict and violence in your relationship, that it's more likely that you're going to struggle, right? Having a baby is such an incredibly difficult time, and to have that additional stress on you and conflict can be a very, very high risk factor for postpartum depression. The fourth risk factor is social support, or rather not having social support. Social support is huge. Mothers were never meant to go through this totally alone, right? And somehow with the way society works now and what we learn, we think that we're just supposed to be good at it and do it all ourselves, and that we don't need help, and asking for help is a sign of weakness. And if you feel those things, that's not your fault that you feel that. You've been taught that you're supposed to be good at this, that it should be easy, that you should just naturally know what to do, that you should be able to handle it all. But it's just so not true. You should not be able to handle this all. You deserve support. You need support. And we know that women who have more support do better mentally and emotionally once baby comes. Okay, so it's a really, really important risk factor. If you have no support and no help, then think about how you can maybe bring more into the equation. The fifth risk factor for postpartum depression is other stressful life events. So whenever we have stress in our lives, it just adds up, right? And having a baby can be one of the biggest stressors you could ever go through. But if you're also experiencing financial stress, let's say you've lost somebody in your life, right? Maybe there's other conflict, maybe your partner's lost their income or a job change, maybe you've moved across the country or something else major has shifted in your life. These are stressful life events, okay? Maybe there's a sickness in the family, right? So they all add up, and even though it might seem separate and not part of your postpartum experience, it can make postpartum depression even more likely to happen. The sixth risk factor I want to talk about in this video is childbirth trauma. Now, childbirth trauma is exactly what it sounds like. It's trauma from giving birth, and that can be any way that your baby comes into the world, whether it's cesarean section, whether it's vaginal birth, whether it's natural or not, whether something traumatic happens or not. So sometimes we might think to ourselves, well, I gave birth and nothing really went wrong, but I still feel like it was traumatic. So childbirth trauma, and I'm going to make another video about this in more detail, but it's subjective. If it felt traumatic for you, if you're having a hard time processing it, if you're still feeling emotional and scared and upset about what it was like to give birth, that's trauma. And no one gets to tell you that it isn't, right? But what's important to know is that when you have a traumatic childbirth, you're more likely to develop postpartum depression. And think about it. You go through something so intense, so difficult, and then you're given a baby and you're expected to just shift your focus and take care of that baby now. And that's really, really hard to do, okay? So again, this idea of risk factors, this is one of the several different risk factors that can increase your chance of postpartum depression. The last risk factor that I want to talk about in this video is perfectionism and high expectations of yourself. This might be surprising to you, but we know this through a lot of research that people who score higher on perfectionism scales, so there's actually like assessments and tests that you can take to see how much of a perfectionist you are. And if you have really high expectations of yourself, if you expect yourself to just nail it and be so good at all things mother related, it's going to be a pretty big reality check and really disappointing and really hard on you emotionally when you bump up against struggles. And the thing with becoming a mom is that the struggle is inevitable. And it's not a reflection of you or what you're not good at. It's just because it's hard to become a mom. It's hard to have a baby and to take care of a baby and to love a baby and to give. It's really hard. And when you expect yourself to be so good at it and to love it and to never get frustrated and to never have to ask for help and to come across like, everything's just perfect in your life, if you expect that of yourself, it's really hard to reconcile when things don't go to plan. So just checking in with yourself, are you a perfectionist? Have you used that term for yourself before? Just know that that does make it more likely to experience postpartum depression once your baby arrives. What's important to know is that these risk factors are not a sentence, right? If you said yes to all of these factors, yes, that's me, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to develop postpartum depression. It's just more likely that you will compared to a woman who hasn't had any of these experiences, okay? And I know that might feel unfair. I know that might feel hard to look at, but it is really valuable information to know why you might be struggling, what types of things are related to that. And also this gives you information of what you can do. So for example, if you experience birth trauma, then you know it's really important to get some support so that you can process that. Or if you've realized, oh, I don't have any social support, that makes it more likely that I'm gonna have postpartum depression, then you need to look at that. Like, how am I gonna get more support? If I don't have anybody, can I hire somebody? Can I reach out? Can I ask for help? Okay? If you notice that you are a perfectionist, that you are really hard on yourself, then that's something that you can work on. That doesn't have to be that way forever. You can actually shift the way you treat yourself. And that can be really useful for you as you go into postpartum or through your journey in motherhood. Okay, so again, these things are not sentences. They're not just like, well, I guess that's who I am and I have to accept it. You can work on some of these things, okay? Stressful life events, for example. You can look at things going on in your life and think, where do I have control? There's some things that we don't have control. We don't have control if there's a pandemic. We don't have control if a family member is sick or if our partner loses our job. But where do you have control? Is there anything that you can do to help reduce the stress in your life? Okay? Let me know what questions that you have in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm happy to make videos based on what you need. So let me know what questions you have and I'm happy to support. Remember to subscribe and click the bell so that you get notifications every time I post, which is on Wednesdays. Talk to you soon.